A Victorian house at the end of a dead-end street in a town that forgot it was there, empty for 60 years. The town knows the stories. Nobody goes near it. Inside the third-floor hallway, a dog is scratching at the base of a wall that nobody ever questioned. Until now, the baseboard is pine. Everything else in this house is oak. One knock on the plaster returns a hollow sound. Not solid, not right. Something with empty air behind it. A woman places her palm flat against the surface. Her hands are swollen at every joint. She has not played piano in 4 years. Behind this wall, something has been waiting, and it was written for exactly her hands. The morning the movers came, Dorothy Bell did not pack. She had packed everything else. The clothes, the books, the small frame photographs she kept on the dresser, the box of letters Howard had written her across 30 years of marriage back when people still wrote letters. Everything went into bags and boxes and the trunk of the Buick that sat in the driveway with its engine cold. Everything except one thing. She walked to the piano at 6 in the morning, before the light came all the way up, before Howard was awake, before the day had a chance to become the day it was going to be. The piano was a Yamaha upright, nothing fancy. She had bought it used 32 years ago from a retiring music teacher in the next county who had loved it well and priced it fairly. It was not the most beautiful instrument she had ever touched. It was the one she had touched the most. 30 years of students sitting on the bench beside her. 30 years of scales and stumbles and the silence that happened right before a student played something correctly for the first time. That silence was her favorite sound in the world. She sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. The morning light was thin and gray through the living room window. She could feel the dust that had settled on the keys. She could feel the weight of everything. Her hands were not what they had been. The joints of her fingers sat higher now, knobbed and thick, her knuckles enlarged at every angle by the arthritis that had come 4 years ago and had not left. She tried to form a chord. C major, the simplest chord there is. The first chord, the one she had taught 800 children across 30 years, the one she had described 1,000 times. Thumb on C, third finger on E, fifth finger on G. 3 notes, 2 whole steps, the beginning of everything. Her fingers could not reach, not quite, not anymore. The span was too wide, or her fingers were too stiff, or both, or the distance between what she could do and what she wanted to do was the exact width of something she did not have a name for. She sat for a long time with her hands on the keys, not playing, just resting there. Howard appeared in the doorway at 6:30. She knew it was him without turning. 48 years, and she knew his footfall. She knew the sound of him in any room. He crossed to the kitchen without speaking. She heard the quiet clank of the coffee maker. She heard the drawer open and close. 2 mugs from the cabinet. He came back and set her coffee on the top of the piano. First always. Her coffee first, then his. He didn't say anything, because he knew better, because there was nothing to say that was worth saying, because he had married a woman who needed silence, like other people needed air, and he had learned this in the first year and had never forgotten it. He sat in the armchair across the room. He drank his coffee. She kept her hands on the keys. They were still sitting like that when the movers arrived at 8. Her eldest son Derek came with them. He was 52 years old, and he had his father's eyes and his grandfather's ability to make a room feel smaller simply by entering it. He was carrying his phone and wearing a jacket that had been expensive when he bought it. He didn't look at the piano right away. He looked at his phone. "It's already done, Dad," he had said on the phone 2 weeks ago when Howard had asked about the sale. "The buyer closes Friday." The buyer, as if a house was just a thing, as if 48 years in those walls was something that could be settled in a transaction, as if the scrape on the kitchen door frame from the year Roland was 12 and put his bicycle in the wrong way was just a scrape on a door frame. Derek said the word equity A great deal. He said the word retirement. He said the words each of us 3 times in one conversation, meaning himself and Roland and Nadine. Each of us. Not you and Mom. Each of us. Howard had come back from that conversation and stood in the kitchen for a long time. Dorothy had not gone in to talk to him. She had gone to the piano. The movers were efficient. She had to give them that. They were careful and quiet, and they had the quiet competence of men who did a hard job well. She watched from the hallway as they wrapped the piano in moving blankets, strapped it, lifted it, moved it through the front door she had walked through 10,000 times. She did not follow it outside. She did not watch it go down the driveway. She listened to the sound of it moving away from her, the shuffle of their feet on the porch, the creak of the truck ramp, the flat thud of it being settled somewhere she would not see. Then the truck door, then nothing. Derek left an hour later. He said something about the timing of the closing. He said something about the real estate agent. He said something about a senior living community that his assistant had researched. He had a folder. Howard took the folder. Dorothy went upstairs. She didn't look in the jewelry box until the next morning. The small cedar box on the dresser, the one that smelled like her mother's perfume, the one that had sat on that dresser for 42 years. She opened it while Howard was in the shower. The ring was gone. Her mother's wedding ring, gold band slightly worn. Her mother had worn it the day she married Dorothy's father, worn it the day Dorothy was born, worn it through everything, worn it until the day she died, and Dorothy had kept it in that box for 15 years since, and now it was gone. She knew who had taken it. She could not say it out loud yet. The knowing and the saying were different distances. She put the box down. She went downstairs. Howard was counting the money in his wallet. $340, he said. She sat down beside him at the kitchen table. Her daughter Nadine had 4 empty bedrooms and had said the timing wasn't good. Roland had changed his phone number. Derek had sent an email about an 18-month wait list for subsidized housing. He had signed it best. Best. Dorothy looked at Howard. Howard looked at her. He turned the key in the ignition. East, he said. She didn't ask why. There was nothing east that she knew of, but west was Derek, north was Nadine, south was Roland and his new number. East was just east. East would have to be enough. They drove for 3 hours through the flat country where the highway went straight forever, and the sky sat so low you felt you could touch it if you reached. She watched the land change, the green softening to pale and then paler, the farms getting smaller, or the distances between them getting longer. She wasn't sure which. She was thinking about the ring, not with anger, not yet, with something quieter than that. The sadness of realizing a thing has already happened, that you cannot unhappen. You can mourn it, you can name it, but you cannot go back to the moment before you knew. Howard had not spoken since the highway outside the city. She had not spoken either. This was not a silence of unhappiness. It was the silence of 2 people who had been together long enough that silence was a form of conversation. She knew what he was feeling. He knew what she was feeling. There were no words necessary for that. The town of Caulfield appeared at the edge of a long curve in the road, a water tower first, then a gas station, then a main street that had once been something and was in the process of deciding what to be next, a hardware store, a post office, a church with a steeple that needed work, empty storefronts, their windows dusty, a population sign she could not read from the car. They stopped because of the gas, and because Howard needed to stand up, and because Dorothy needed a restroom, and the only place open at 3 in the afternoon was a diner called Nora's. The woman behind the counter looked up when they came in. She was somewhere around 60 with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a coffee pot in each hand, which seemed appropriate somehow. She had the face of a person who had seen a great many things come through that door and had developed a policy of not being surprised. She looked at them. She looked at the space behind them, which was empty, regular or decaf. Howard started to say they just needed the restroom. The woman shook her head. Sit down first. I'll bring you both a cup. Her name was Nora Lund. She had owned the diner for 30 years. She had 2 coffee pots because one was always warm and the world was full of people who needed the warm one. She brought them coffee and 2 slices of blueberry pie, and when Howard reached for his wallet, she shook her head again. First time in is free. Is that a real policy? It is now. Dorothy drank her coffee and did not say much. She listened to the sound of the diner, the refrigerator humming, the pie warm under her fork, the feeling of a room that had been made comfortable on purpose by a person who understood what comfort was for. She saw the bulletin board on her way back from the restroom, flyers for a yard sale, a lost cat, a church social, and, at the bottom, tacked with a single pin, a notice from the Caulfield County Tax Authority. An auction, Saturday morning, 13 properties. She stopped. She read it. 14 Prosper Street, Victorian circa 1890, 3 stories plus tower, condemned by the county, 1993. No utilities. Foundation status unknown. Roof status unknown. Structural assessment none on file. Minimum bid, $12. She stood and looked at it for a moment. Then she went back to the counter. Howard, she said. He looked up. She gestured. He got up and read the flyer. He looked at her. She looked at him. $12, he said. She nodded. He looked at the flyer again. He was doing something behind his eyes that she recognized. The thing he did when he was looking at a structure, when he was reading a building the way other people read a face, assessing, calculating. He was 74 years old, and he had been a structural engineer for 40 years, and he had a talent that was almost impossible to explain to someone who didn't have it. He could look at something broken and know whether it was worth saving. He looked at the flyer. He looked at her. Let's go see it. The Victorian on Prosper Street sat at a dead end 2 blocks from Main Street, separated from its nearest neighbor by a lot of goldenrod and thistle that had decided to become permanent. It was 3 stories of old wood frame construction with a tower on the southeast corner that had probably been beautiful once and was now beautiful in a different, harder way. The porch sagged on the left side where a support had given way. The paint had gone to bare wood in long strips. One window in the tower was broken, and something had nested in the gap. Howard parked at the curb. He got out. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets for a full minute, not moving, just looking, just reading it. Dorothy waited. Then he walked up the front steps, testing each one before his full weight, his hand on the porch column, flat against the wood, fingers spread. He looked at the roof line. He looked at the foundation stones visible through the gaps in the lattice. The bones are good, he said. You can tell that from here. I can tell that from here. The auction the next morning was in the county courthouse. Metal folding chairs. A woman in a gray blazer reading from a clipboard. About 30 people, most of them farmers or contractors or dealers in salvage. The lots went steadily. 3 empty parcels, a half-acre near the creek, 2 small houses on the east side. Then the auctioneer said, 14 Prosper Street. She read the description without enthusiasm. Victorian residence, 4,000 square feet, 3 stories tower. Condemned. No utilities. Roof and foundation unknown. A man in the 3rd row turned around. That's the haunted house, he said. People laughed. Not Howard. The auctioneer asked for $12. Silence. She looked around the room with the expression of someone who expected exactly this. Do I have $12? More silence. She picked up her pen. Howard raised his hand. The room went quiet. Not slowly, all at once. $12, Howard said. For the house. The auctioneer looked at him over her glasses. Sir, you understand this property is condemned. The county makes no representations about structural integrity, habitability, or safety. I understand. There are no utilities. Reconnection requires a structural certification from a licensed engineer. I'm a licensed structural engineer, Howard said. Retired. The auctioneer blinked. She looked at her clipboard. She looked at him. $12 to the gentleman in the back. Going once. Nobody moved. Going twice. Not a hand lifted. Sold. She didn't sound convinced it was a good idea, but she took his money and gave him a key on a plain metal ring and shook his hand with the energy of someone releasing all responsibility for what happened next. They drove to the house with the windows down. Howard walked the perimeter first. Dorothy watched from the sidewalk. He tapped the exterior walls. He pressed his palm flat in several places. He crouched at the foundation corners and examined the stones with the small flashlight he kept on his keychain. He circled the whole house before he went back to the front door. He tried the key. The lock resisted. He tried again with more patience. It turned. The door swung inward. Dust. Old wood. Something faintly sweet underneath, like dried flowers from a long time ago. The foyer was dark until Howard found a shutter and forced it open, and the light came in across a hardwood floor buried under decades of dust. Oak, Howard said. The floor's oak. Look at the staircase. She looked. The staircase rose along the left wall, solid, the banister carved intact, not a spindle missing. He was already down in the cellar with his flashlight. She walked slowly through the first floor, the parlor, the bay window that must have been stunning once, the dining room with its stone fireplace, the mantel still holding a row of small ceramic figures, too dust-covered to identify. She ran her finger along the banister. It left a clean line in the gray. It's a real house, she said. When Howard came back up from the cellar, she said it to herself as much as to him. I mean, it's not a ruin. Someone cared about this place. Howard was nearly smiling. Oak framing throughout, he said. Stone foundation. No visible cracks. The porch needs rebuilding, and the roof has some soft spots near the chimney, but the structure is sound. He looked at the room. Whoever built this built it to last. We got it for $12, she said. Yeah. She looked around. Yeah. They slept in the parlor that first night on sleeping bags from the thrift store on Main Street. No electricity, no running water. Howard had found a battery lantern and a case of water from the hardware store where a quiet man named Pete had looked at their $12 deed and opened a store account without asking many questions. Come back when you need something, Pete said. You will. The house made sounds after dark, creaks and pops, a low groan when the wind shifted. Howard lay in his sleeping bag with his eyes open. It's not ghosts, he said. She knew it wasn't. He explained it anyway, because he loved explaining things he understood. Wood contracts when the temperature drops. Exterior walls cool faster than interior structure. Differential stress across the framing. She had been married to him for 48 years. She knew how houses breathed. She smiled in the dark. Even now, even with everything, he could still do that. She did not sleep, not from fear, not from cold, though the floor was hard and the night air moved through the gaps in the old boards, and her hip ached in the way it always ached now. She walked through the rooms instead, not searching, just learning the shape of the place, the way you learned a new neighborhood by walking it. She moved with the lantern through the parlor and the dining room and the kitchen with its hand pump she had not tried yet. She moved through the dark like something finding its footing. She ended up in the back corner of the parlor. The lantern caught something she had missed in the daylight, a piano bench. Simple oak with a hinged lid, sitting alone against the wall, and around it on the floor, pressed deep into the old wood, 4 circular marks, the ghost of where piano legs had stood for years, maybe decades. She sat down on the bench. She lifted the lid. Inside a layer of fine dust, and at the bottom a single piece of cloth, yellowed, folded neatly. She did not know what it was for. She left it where it was. She placed her hands on the flat lid of the bench. She shaped them into the position for a chord. Her fingers couldn't reach. They never reached anymore. But she kept trying every time, the way a person keeps testing a door they know is locked. Her hands in her lap, her eyes dry, until they weren't. She did not make noise when she cried. She had learned to cry quietly many years ago, first as a child in a house that discouraged it, and then later as a teacher who needed her students to feel safe, and then later still as a mother whose children needed to believe she had everything under control. She sat on a piano bench in an empty house in a town she had never heard of 3 days ago, and she let herself cry the way she had not let herself cry when Derek sold the piano, when Roland changed his number, when Nadine said the timing wasn't good, when she had opened the jewelry box and found it empty. For the ring. Her mother had worn it the day she married, the day Dorothy was born, the day Dorothy held her hand at the end and felt the ring against her palm one last time. She had slept with it under her pillow for a year after her mother died, 15 years in the cedar box on the dresser, the one that smelled like her mother's perfume, and now it was in a pawn shop on Meridian Street, and she knew this the way she knew many things she could not unhappen. Howard found her at first light. He came down the stairs quietly, the way he moved when he knew she needed to hear him coming. He saw her on the bench. He saw her hands in her lap. He did not say anything. He sat beside her. He reached into the pocket of his shirt, the left pocket where he always kept one, a hair clip, hers, the kind she used to keep her hair back, the kind she was always losing. He had found it on the bathroom floor 2 days ago at the old house and tucked it in his pocket without saying anything. He placed it in her hand. They watched the morning come through the bay window, the pale light at the edges first, then more, then the full, thin gold of an October morning finding its way across a parlor floor that had not seen it in 60 years. She clipped her hair back. They sat together in the quiet of two people who had found their way to the same bench. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Nora Lund knocked on the front door that morning with a wicker basket and a rain jacket over one arm, even though the sky was perfectly clear. "Saw your light last night," she said. "First time in 60 years that house has had a light on." "Battery lantern," Howard said. "Still counts." She left muffins, coffee in a thermos, apples, and a wedge of cheese wrapped in wax paper. She refused money. They sat on the front steps and ate in the cool air while the overgrown yard came alive with birds. "Tell us about this house," Dorothy said. Nora poured herself a cup of coffee from the thermos and settled onto the step. "The woman who lived here was named Mabel Ames," she said. "She was a piano teacher mostly, gave lessons in the parlor for years. Her husband came back from Korea in a box in 1952. She raised their daughter alone after that." Dorothy looked up. "Alice," Nora said. "That girl was something. My mother used to talk about her all the time. She said you could hear Alice practicing from the sidewalk in summer when the windows were open. People would just stop and stand there and listen. She won the state piano competition at 15. She had a place at the conservatory waiting for her. She stopped. What happened?" "There was an accident," Nora said. "When she was 16, something wrong with her left hand after. The doctor said it would heal mostly, but the fine control she needed to play at that level wasn't going to come back." Dorothy said nothing. "She died 2 years later," Nora said. "Pneumonia. She was 19. It happened fast. And Mabel sealed up the 3rd floor and never went up there again. She lived alone down here for years. Nobody in and out. Then one morning the mail carrier noticed the letters piling up. She was gone. No family left. County took the house for taxes." Dorothy was looking up at the 3rd floor windows. The glass was dark behind the grime. "And nobody ever went up there," she said. "Nobody wanted to," Nora said. "Too many stories about noises in the night." She paused. "The well still works, by the way, around the side of the house near the kitchen wall. Hand pump, cast iron. Mabel used it until the day she died. Howard found the pump exactly where Nora said. He primed it with their bottled water and worked the handle until it caught. Brown first, then clear. 'We have water,' he told Dorothy when he came back. 'We have a house and we have water.'" She looked at him. That's more than we had 3 days ago." He had said it plainly, without dramatics, without trying to make it into more than it was, which was the thing she had loved about him from the beginning, the ability to say things plainly without diminishing them. Cal Pruitt appeared the next morning. He was 17, tall and thin, with a baseball cap pulled low and work boots that had seen actual work. He stood at the end of the front walk and watched Howard measure the porch railing for a long time. Finally, he said something. "You need help with that, depends. You know which end of a level goes up, the bubble end." "Close enough. Come here." His name was Cal Pruitt. He lived 4 houses down with his grandmother Ida, who was 78 and on oxygen and didn't move around much anymore. He had dropped out of school the year before to take care of her. He picked up odd jobs when he could find them. "What do you charge?" he asked. $15 an hour, Howard said. "And everything I know about structural engineering." Cal looked at him. "I don't need to know about structural engineering. You might. Hold this board steady." Dorothy watched Howard teach. He didn't lecture, he showed. He let Cal make small mistakes and find them himself. "Check it again," he would say, and Cal would check it and find the 1/4 inch. And Howard would say, "That's a shim, not a new board. Don't waste material on a 1/4 inch." Cal understood that kind of thinking. She could see it. He was a boy who had been running a household on nearly nothing for over a year. Waste was something he could not afford to understand theoretically. Dorothy went to the library on the 3rd day. It was in a brick building on Main Street that used to be a church and still smelled like hymnals. The librarian was a young woman with wire-rimmed glasses who brightened when Dorothy asked for the local history collection. "Nobody ever asks for that," she said, pulling cardboard boxes from the back room. "We've got newspaper clippings going back to 1910. She found it in the 2nd box. A clipping from the Caulfield Gazette, 1954. The paper was yellowed and thin at the folds. The headline, "Local Girl 15 takes first place at state piano competition." Below it, a photograph printed on cheap newsprint. A young woman at a concert grand piano, hands on the keys, chin slightly lifted, a small composed smile. Alice Ames. Dorothy held the clipping in both hands. She looked at the hands in the photograph, the wrist position level and relaxed, the way the shoulders sat dropped and easy, the way the girl held herself at that instrument with the confidence of someone who had moved past technique and arrived somewhere else entirely. She had been 15. In the same box, she found a photograph of the Victorian taken sometime in the 1940s. Fresh paint every window with flower boxes. A woman on the porch in an apron, hair pinned up, smiling at the camera. Mabel Ames, young, alive, standing on the porch that Howard was rebuilding right now. And another clipping. 1958, an obituary 2 inches long. Alice Meredith, Ames 19, born Caulfield 1939, pianist, preceded in death by her father, Arthur Ames Correa 1952, survived by her mother, Mabel Ames. No other survivors listed. Dorothy put the clippings down on the reading table. She sat in the quiet library for a long time, survived by her mother, and then her mother not long after, and then no one. A house full of something. For 60 years. She was still thinking about it when she came home to find Howard and Cal on the roof. She was still thinking about it when she cooked dinner on the small camp stove Cal had brought over. She was still thinking about it when she sat on the front porch steps in the evening with her coffee and listened to the street quiet down. The next morning, Finn arrived. She was crossing the yard to the side of the house where the water pump was, and she looked up, and there he was at the end of the front walk, medium size, mixed breed, some kind of hound in the face and something else in the legs, tawny brown coat with a darker saddle across his back, and down the center of his face from his forehead all the way to the tip of his muzzle, a clean white stripe, a blaze, pale and precise against the darker fur, the most visible thing about him when the light hit at an angle. His right ear stood straight up. At the tip of the right ear, a small V-shaped notch, old and healed, over the kind of mark that came from something a long time ago. His left ear folded forward at the tip, softer and lower than the right. The asymmetry gave his face an expression of perpetual mild inquiry, as if he was always asking a question he already half knew the answer to. Around his neck a strip of leather, red once, faded now to a brownish rose. No tag, no name, nothing attached to it. His eyes were amber, the deep honey brown of old glass held up to light. He stood at the end of the walk and looked at her. She looked back at him. She put the water bucket down. She found the bowl she had been using to soak her hands at night. She filled it from the pump and set it on the ground between them. Then she stepped back. He watched her. He looked at the bowl. He walked forward and drank. Then he sat. He looked at her. His tail moved once, carefully, the tail of an animal who had been burned before and was not willing to be certain yet. She understood that. She went to get her own coffee. When she came back, he was sitting by the porch steps. He was still there at noon. He was still there when Howard came down for lunch. Howard looked at the dog. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at his sandwich. He broke off a piece of crust and set it on the step. The dog ate it. Howard went back to the roof. By the end of the day, the dog was inside. She named him Finn that evening, not for any particular reason. The name came to her, and it fit the way the right names fit things. He settled in the kitchen, and she settled in the parlor, and Howard came down from the roof at dusk and told her he had found 3 soft spots, but nothing that couldn't be patched. She told him about the library, about the clippings, about Alice Ames. He was quiet while she talked. He had that quality of listening that some people had, where you could feel them actually receive what you were saying instead of just waiting for their turn. 19 years old, she said. He nodded. She composed music, Dorothy said. That's what Nora said. In those last years after the accident, she composed. He looked at the ceiling. I wonder if it's still up there, he said. She had not let herself think that specifically. She thought it now. She woke the next morning to the sound of Finn at the stairs, not barking, just moving, deliberate, focus, the motion of an animal that had decided something. She heard him on the first step, the second, the sound of his nails on the old wood going up. She followed him. He went all the way to the 3rd floor without stopping, up the narrow staircase where the ceiling came lower and the walls pressed closer and the air was different from the rest of the house, cooler, quieter, the stillness of a place that had not had traffic in a very long time. At the top of the stairs, a short hallway, 2 doors on the right that open onto small rooms, empty, and at the end of the hallway, a wall. Finn went straight to it. He stopped at the base of the wall and put his nose to the baseboard. He sniffed along the length of it, and then he started to scratch, not frantically, not the way a dog scratched at something that frightened him, steadily, purposefully, the way an animal scratched at something on the other side of an obstacle. Dorothy crouched beside him. She ran her hand along the baseboard. Then she ran her hand along the baseboard in the hallway behind her. She stood up. She looked at the wall. She looked back down the hall. She went to find Howard. He came up with his flashlight and his careful hands and his 40 years of knowing what things were made of. He crouched at the baseboard. He ran his own hand along it. He stood. He looked at the wallpaper. He stepped closer. He looked at the pattern, then at the hallway wallpaper behind him. He looked for a long time. This baseboard, he said quietly, it's pine. She waited. Everything else in this house is oak. He pressed his knuckle to the plaster and knocked once. Then he knocked again, 2 inches to the left, and 2 inches past that, moving along the wall with the precision of a man who had learned to read what was beneath surfaces by the sound they made when questioned. He stopped. He knocked again. The sound that came back was thin, light, not the solid thud of plaster on lath, on proper framing, something with empty space behind it. There's a room behind this wall, Howard said. He said it quietly, the way he said things that mattered, Dorothy looked at the wall that should not have been there, at the end of a hallway where nobody had walked in longer than most people in Caulfield had been alive. She thought about Mabel Ames, standing on her porch in an apron in a photograph from the 40s, smiling at someone she loved. She thought about Alice at 15, chin lifted, hands on the keys. She thought about a wall that wasn't supposed to be there. She thought about what was on the other side of it. Finn sat beside her with his white blaze pointing forward, his amber eyes looking at the plaster with the calm patience of an animal that already knew. "Can you open it?" she asked. Howard put his palm flat against the surface. He held it there, and from behind the wall, through inches of plaster and old wood, she could see in the way his face changed that he felt something. A draft. The faintest movement of cold, still air pushing through, as if something behind that wall had been holding its breath for 60 years and had just decided it was time to breathe again. "I can open it," Howard said. They needed tools and a day, and breakfast first, which Howard insisted on because he was that kind of man. Crackers and cheese on the front steps, with Finn between them and the morning light coming sideways through the elm trees on Prosper Street. She ate. She drank her coffee. She kept looking up at the third-floor windows. The plaster came down in chunks. Howard worked the chisel along the seam where the false wall met the original framing. Each blow deliberate. Each blow opening the wall a little more. Cal held the flashlight steady and didn't ask questions, which was a skill worth more than most people recognize. Finn sat at the bottom of the stairs and did not come up. He just waited. Behind the plaster was a layer of thin wooden strips. Behind the strips was a gap of dark air, and behind the air, visible through the broken plaster, when Cal tilted the light, was a door. Heavy oak, 6 panels, brass knob tarnished nearly black, a brass keyhole. They stood in the hall and looked at it. Nobody spoke. Howard cleared the rest of the plaster from the door frame. Then he ran his hand along the top of the frame, a slow sweep, his fingers trailing along the thin ledge of molding where the crown met the wall. His hand stopped. He lifted something. A key. Brass. Old. Simple notched blade tarnished to the color of raw honey. He held it up and they all looked at it in the flashlight beam for a moment, because Mabel Ames had sealed this room, had plastered over the door, had hidden it behind a false wall, but she had left the key exactly an inch above the frame, where anyone who opened the wall would find it. "She couldn't go in," Dorothy said softly. Howard looked at the key. He knew what she meant, but she couldn't lock it away forever either. He put the key in the lock. It resisted, then it turned, with a sound that was both small and enormous, a single clean click in the quiet hallway, and then the door swung inward on its hinges, and a breath of air came through the opening, cool and dry and carrying a smell unlike anything else in the house. Not dust, not mildew, paper, varnish, and something almost sweet underneath like dried flowers from another decade. Howard stepped in first. The flashlight swept the room, and then they all saw it. The room was larger than Dorothy had imagined, running the full width of the east side of the house, with 2 tall windows that looked out over Prosper Street, both windows intact, the glass thick with grime but unbroken, and the morning light pressing through in pale golden bars that fell across the floor. In the center of the room, covered in a white cotton sheet yellowed with age, was a shape she recognized from 40 years of working next to one, a grand piano. She knew its silhouette the way she knew Howard's shoulders in a doorway, without needing to see the whole thing. The curve of the lid, the angle of the legs visible beneath the sheet hem, the presence a grand piano had in a room, the way it took up space with intention. Around it, on every flat surface available on chairs, and a low bookshelf under the windows, and stacked in careful columns on the floor, were piles of paper, sheet music, handwritten in dark ink on staff lines, pages and pages of it, hundreds of them, and against the far wall a small walnut writing desk. slanted top, a single drawer. On the desk, placed precisely in the center, was a sealed envelope. On the front, in careful faded handwriting, "To whoever finds this." Nobody spoke. Dorothy was the one who finally moved. She crossed the room to the desk and picked up the envelope. She turned it over in her hands. She could feel the thickness of the paper inside. She looked at Howard. He nodded. She opened it carefully, slid her thumb under the flap, the way you open something you wanted to preserve. 2 pages, same careful hand, ink faded to light brown but legible throughout. She read it aloud. "My name is Mabel Ames. I am writing this letter in February of 1959, 1 year after the death of my daughter Alice Meredith Ames, who was 19 years old." Her voice did not break, not at first. Alice was a pianist. That is not enough to say. Alice was music itself. She heard things in the silence that the rest of us could not. She played her first recital at 8, won the state competition at 15. By 16, she had been accepted to the conservatory in Cincinnati on full scholarship. Everything was in place. In the fall of 1955, when Alice was 16, there was an accident, a horse cart on the county road. Her left hand was badly injured. The doctor said she would regain most of the use, but the fine motor control, the speed and precision a concert pianist needs at that level would not fully come back. Alice did not stop. She did not complain. The day she came home from the hospital with her left hand bandaged and swollen, she sat at this piano and she began to compose. Dorothy paused. She looked at the sheet music around her. She kept reading. What Alice wrote was unlike anything I had heard before. She composed music for hands that could not do what healthy hands could do. Wider fingerings, simplified chord voicings that still sounded full and rich. Pieces that a pianist with limited strength and reduced reach could play without pain, without compromise, without the music suffering for it. She said she was writing for every pianist who had been told they could not play anymore. She composed for 3 years, more than 40 complete pieces, for solo piano, for piano, with strings for small ensembles, each one annotated in her own hand with notes about the adapted fingerings and the reasons behind each choice. Alice died of pneumonia on March the 14th, 1958. She was 19 years old. It happened in 4 days. She was composing at this desk on a Monday, and she was gone by Friday. Dorothy's voice had gone very quiet. "I have sealed this room because I cannot bear to enter it, but I cannot destroy what she created. It is all I have left of her, and it is all she left of herself. In the drawer of this desk, you will find a bank book. I have placed $800 in a trust account at the savings bank in town. It is everything I had. I have asked that it remain open until someone presents the bank book and this letter. The money is for this house and for music education for those who need it most. If you are reading this letter, someone has found this room. I do not know who you are. I do not know how many years have passed, but I believe you were meant to find it. Please, let the music live. Mabel Agnes Ames, February 1959. Howard was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his knees up, his hands on his knees. Cal was in the doorway, cap in his hands, not moving. Dorothy folded the letter. She held it for a moment. Then she looked at the piano. She crossed to it. She took hold of the yellowed sheet in both hands. She pulled it off. It slid to the floor in a soft pile. The piano was ebony, a Steinway, Model B from the size of it, 7 feet of instrument. The finish was dull from 60 years of still air, but the wood was intact, no cracks, no warping. The sealed room had kept the temperature and humidity almost unchanged for 6 decades. She lifted the fallboard. The keys were yellowed ivory, the sharps dark brown. She pressed middle C with one finger. The note came out slightly flat and with a quality that wasn't quite right, but it came out. The hammer still struck. The string still vibrated. The soundboard still carried the tone. "It needs tuning," she said, "but it works." She sat down on the piano bench, the real bench cushion matching the instrument. She adjusted her position the way she had done it 10,000 times. Spine long, shoulders down, weight forward slightly. On the music stand, someone had left a composition open. The title was written at the top of the first page in Alice's handwriting, for Hands That Remember. Dorothy looked at the notation. She read through the first 8 bars. She read them again, her mouth opened slightly, not from surprise, from recognition. "Howard," she said. He was still on the floor. He looked up. The fingerings. She was pointing at the numbers penciled above and below the notes. Look at the fingerings. He didn't read music, but he crossed the room and looked at what she was pointing at. "These aren't normal fingerings," she said. Her voice had changed. It had the intensity of someone who had found something important and was still registering the full weight of it. "The intervals are wider. She's using the thumb and second finger where a standard arrangement would use the fourth and fifth. The chord voicings are spread differently." She paused. "She designed these for someone who can't reach with the ring and pinky fingers." He looked at the page. He looked at her hands. She placed her hands on the keys, her knuckles, swollen at every joint, stiff in the cold. The ring finger of her right hand that barely bent anymore. The left hand better, but not good. The fingers that had not reached an octave in 4 years. The hands she had been carrying around like evidence of something she had lost. She played the first chord. It sounded full, open, rich, and her fingers reached every note. She played the second chord. Third, the first phrase. The melody rose from the old Steinway, slightly flat, slightly thin from the years, but clear and warm and moving forward with its own kind of logic. And Dorothy's hands followed it, found every note, because Alice had put every note exactly where damaged hands could find them. She played the first page, then the second. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. She kept playing. She played 3 of Alice's compositions that morning, sight reading from the yellowed pages, her eyes moving across the staff lines she had known all her life. Each piece was different. Each one was written for hands that worked like hers, not simplified, not stripped down, full music, complex and beautiful, and asking real things of the person at the keyboard, just asking them differently, just asking what those hands could actually do. Cal was sitting on the top step of the staircase just outside the door, his cap in his hand. He wasn't looking at anything in particular. He was just listening. When she finally stopped, the silence in the room was different from the silence that had been there before. Before, it had been the silence of a sealed place. Now it was the silence after something important. Nora came by that evening as she did every evening. She was halfway up the front walk when she stopped, because there was music coming from the 3rd floor. She stood on the walk with her hand against her chest. She listened for a long time. Then she came inside and went straight upstairs. Dorothy was at the piano. She didn't look up. Nora stood in the doorway with her eyes wet. "That's Alice," she said. "I never heard her play, but my mother described it 100 times. She said it sounded like someone talking to you from a very long way off." Dorothy finished the piece she was playing. She lifted her hands from the keys. "It does," she said. Howard went to the bank the next morning. He wore his cleanest shirt. He carried the bank book from the writing desk in his jacket pocket and Mabel's letter in the envelope. He walked to the savings bank on Main Street, which was a small brick building that had opened in 1897 and had the architectural confidence of a building that intended to be standing in 2097. A young woman at the teller window looked at the bank book. She looked at the account number. She typed it in. She typed it again. She picked up the phone on her desk. "Mr. Dyer, could you come out here for a moment?" The bank manager was a man in his 60s with a gray suit and a quality of careful attention that Howard recognized as the professional habit of someone who had spent decades working with other people's important things. His name was Frank Dyer. He took them back to his office. He closed the door. He turned his computer screen so Howard could see it. Mabel Ames, he said. She opened this trust account on February 3rd, 1959, deposited $800, left explicit instructions. Account remains open until someone presents the bank book and the letter. Those were her exact words. She even described the letter. He looked at Howard, and the bank just left it. A trust with clear terms doesn't expire. The account moved from basic savings to a certificate of deposit in '71, then to a conservative mixed portfolio in 1989, stocks and bonds when the holding company restructured. Every transition followed the original terms. Howard looked at the screen. He looked at the number for a long time. $127,000, Frank Dyer said, and 41 cents. Howard sat back in his chair. The manager folded his hands. Mabel specified 2 permitted uses, he said, maintenance and restoration of the property at 14 Prosper Street, and music education for those who need it most. He paused. She thought of everything. She had a very clear mind, Howard said. He walked home with the bank book in his jacket. Dorothy was on the porch. She saw his face. She stood up. What did they say? He told her. He told her the number. He told her the terms. She sat back down on the porch step, pressed both hands flat against her knees, her swollen knuckles catching the October light. $127,000, she said, and 41 cents for the house and for music. Cal was sanding the railing post he had installed the week before. He looked from one of them to the other. Is that enough to fix this place? Howard did the math the way he always did, in his head. Foundation pointing, full electrical, plumbing to all 3 floors, new roof, paint, kitchen and bathroom, permits. It's enough, he said. If we're careful, we can do this right. The work changed after that, not in kind, in scope. Howard stopped patching and started planning. He drew on graph paper at the kitchen table with his engineering pencil. He mapped the original structure the way he had mapped it in his head on the first inspection, and he worked backward from what it had been to what it could be again. Cal worked every day. Howard paid him fairly from the trust fund account, which they had moved to a non-profit foundation in the 3rd week. Dorothy came up with the name, the Ames Bell Music Foundation. Howard had wanted to leave the bell off entirely. She said no. Mabel wanted someone to carry it forward, she said. She used her hands to gesture at the house, at everything, at what they were doing. That's us. Our name goes on it too. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Frank Dyer at the bank helped structure the nonprofit account. A lawyer from the county seat handled the filing at no charge. She said her grandfather played piano. The lawyer said, I can't say no to a story about a piano. People kept saying that. An electrician rewired the first 2 floors. A retired plumber from the church ran new copper lines to the 2nd floor bathroom. By the end of the first month, the Victorian had running water on 2 floors, electricity in every room, a roof that didn't leak, and a piano on the 3rd floor that someone played every morning before the construction noise started. Dorothy worked through Alice's compositions in order. She played each one. She made notes in pencil on the copies she had made from the originals, careful carbon copies that she treated as working documents, while the originals were preserved in archival sleeves that Dorothy had ordered and Cal had picked up from the post office. She played better each week. Her hands would never be what they had been at 40, but Alice's music didn't ask for that. It asked for what she had now, and it made something beautiful with it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock came at the door. Dorothy opened it to find a woman she had not seen before, small, moving slowly, a portable oxygen concentrator on a wheeled cart beside her, the thin tubing looped under her nose, white hair thinly spread, eyes that were still sharp and dark and paying close attention. 78 years old if Dorothy had to guess. Mrs. Bell, the woman said. Yes, my name is Ida Pruitt. I live 4 houses down. She paused. I'm Cal's grandmother. Oh! Dorothy opened the door wider. Please come in. The woman raised one hand. I won't come in. I can't manage the stairs She stopped. She looked at the house for a moment. She looked at the 3rd floor windows. I just needed to say something, if that's all right. Of course. Ida Pruitt looked at her with those careful eyes. I knew Alice, she said. Dorothy went very still. Ida said, I grew up 2 houses over from the Ames place. Mabel and Alice. I was 10 years younger than Alice. She was already something by the time I was old enough to understand what I was hearing. She practiced in the evenings with the windows open in summer. I used to sit on our back steps and listen. Dorothy waited. I was 13 when she died, Ida said. She paused. 65 years ago, and I have thought about her every single year since. She looked down at her hands, then up again. When I heard the music coming from this house, 2 nights ago, I thought I was imagining it. I came outside, and I stood on the sidewalk, and I listened. She stopped. Was it her music? Dorothy asked. The woman's eyes were wet. Yes, she said. I recognized it. I hadn't heard it in 65 years, but I recognized it. Dorothy stepped off the porch. She sat down on the front steps. After a moment, Ida Pruitt sat beside her. Slowly, the oxygen cart beside her, the tube at her nose. They sat on the front steps of a house that had been waiting for 60 years, and Ida told her what she remembered. Alice practicing in the evenings, the way Alice had come home from the hospital with her hand bandaged and gone straight to the piano. Ida watching from the Ames front yard, 10 years old and not fully understanding what she was seeing, just knowing that Alice was doing something that mattered. She used to talk to me sometimes, Ida said. When she was in the yard, she'd see me watching and she'd talk to me like I was worth talking to. I was a little kid who followed her around like a duckling, and she never made me feel small for it. Dorothy looked at her. She was 19, Ida said, and she knew she was running out of time. I didn't understand that then. I understand it now. She was writing as fast as she could, for people she would never meet, for hands she would never hold. She paused. For hands like yours, I think. Dorothy felt the shock of hearing something said plainly that she had known for weeks, but had not let herself say in those exact words. Alice had been composing for 65 years, waiting for exactly the right person to find it. The professor arrived the following Saturday. Her name was Dr. Whitfield, and she had driven 2 hours after the piano tuner told his wife, who told her colleague, who told the professor about a sealed room in a Victorian house in Caulfield. She wore cotton gloves, and she handled each of Alice's compositions with the focused reverence of a person who understood what she was holding. She spent the entire day in the room. She read Mabel's letter 3 times. At the end of the day, she sat in the parlor with Howard and Dorothy and a cup of Nora's coffee. I have spent my career studying adaptive music pedagogy, she said. The field barely existed before the 1970s. There are perhaps a dozen significant early works in the literature. She looked at her notes. What Alice Ames composed in this room between 1955 and 1958 predates all of them. Dorothy looked at her hands. She wasn't just composing music, Dr. Whitfield said. She was inventing a method of teaching, a complete curriculum for pianists with limited mobility. The rest of the world wouldn't arrive at this for another 20 years. Howard looked at the ceiling. What does that mean? Dorothy asked. It means, Dr. Whitfield said, with your permission, I would like to bring a colleague from the conservatory to evaluate this collection for possible publication. Dorothy looked at Mabel's letter in its archival sleeve on the shelf. Mabel wanted the music to live, she said. Then yes. The black sedan appeared on a Wednesday. Dorothy saw it from the 3rd floor window. A car she recognized, not the make or the model, something in the way it parked. something in the way the door opened and a man stepped out who moved through the world as if it owed him its attention. Derek, 52 years old, her son, still wearing a jacket that had been expensive when he bought it. A woman got out of the passenger side. She carried a leather portfolio and had the look of someone who billed by the hour. Dorothy came downstairs without hurrying. Howard was in the parlor. She looked at him. He looked at her. She opened the front door. They sat at the kitchen table, Howard at one end, Dorothy across from Derek. The woman with the portfolio sat beside Derek and placed her things on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this in other kitchens and had long ago stopped finding them personal. Cal was on the porch sanding something. She had not asked him to leave. She had not asked him to stay. Derek put his hands on the table. He looked at the kitchen, at the new paint, the working sink, the actual stove. "Dad," he said. "Mom." He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at them. He had seen the article in the county paper, historic compositions found in sealed Victorian. A friend had sent it. A friend, Dorothy said. He kept going. This house, with this story, with the designation it's going to qualify for, you're looking at $200,000 on the low end, possibly more with the media attention. He leaned forward. "I know a developer. He would make an offer this week. You could sell. Set yourselves up somewhere comfortable. Real heat, real plumbing, a bathroom that doesn't smell like copper pipes." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. "I have a comfortable place," Howard said. "Dad, you're 74. I know how old I am. You're doing manual labor on a roof every other day. I like the roof." Derek looked at his mother. "Mom, talk to him." Dorothy looked at her son for a long moment. She placed her hands on the table, her swollen knuckles, her stiff fingers, the ring finger of her right hand slightly crooked where the joint had thickened, the empty space where a ring had been. She let him see all of it. "Garrett," she said. He flinched, because she had not called him that in years, because Garrett was the name she and Howard had chosen before he decided, somewhere along the way, that Derek was a better fit for the person he wanted to be. "Do you remember when I stopped teaching piano?" She asked it quietly. 5 years ago. He said, "Your hands, Mom. The arthritis. Do you know what you said to me when I told you I couldn't teach anymore? On the phone? That same week." He didn't answer. "You said," she continued, "well, it's not like it was paying the bills anyway. That's what you said. To your mother, the week she lost the thing that had mattered most to her for 30 years. He looked at the table. "And then you sold my piano without asking me." She kept her voice very even. "You told the movers to deal with it, and they took it to a second-hand shop on Route 9 where it sold for $75 to a man who needed something for his garage. I called. They remembered the piano. They remembered you. Blue jacket, nice car. Said his mother didn't need it anymore. Garrett." He said nothing. "You took my mother's wedding ring from my jewelry box," Dorothy said, "the day before the house closed. You drove it to a pawn shop on Meridian Street, and you sold it for $400. The room went perfectly still. Cal had stopped sanding. I called every pawn shop within 50 miles, she said. The one on Meridian Street remembered you. They remembered the ring. They said it was a gold band, slightly worn, engraved on the inside. My mother had it engraved with my parents' initials and their wedding date, 1951. She looked at him. That ring was the only thing I had left of my mother. I slept with it under my pillow for a year after she died. 15 years in a cedar box that smelled like her perfume, and you sold it for $400 because you thought I wouldn't notice, or because you thought it didn't matter, or because you thought I was just your mother, and mothers don't get to have things that matter. Garrett's face had gone white. Not red, not angry, white. The color a face went when registering the full weight of a thing it cannot walk back. This house is not for sale, Dorothy said. Alice's music is not for sale. We are not going anywhere. Mabel Ames left this house for someone who would take care of it. She left that music for someone who would let it live. And that is us. I play that piano every single day. I have a student, a girl who was told by 2 teachers that she would never play piano because of her injured hand. She is playing Alice's music with those exact hands, and that is worth more than any number your developer friend can put on a check. She unfolded her hands from the table. You're welcome to disagree. Garrett stood. His associate stood beside him, and she had the grace to look at the floor. This is a mistake, Garrett said, but his voice had nothing in it. No force, no conviction, just the mechanical sound of a man completing a sentence he had started. You're welcome to think so, Dorothy said. He walked to the front door. He paused with his hand on the knob. He didn't turn around. He stood there, a long moment. Then he opened the door and walked out. Howard followed him onto the porch. Garrett was already on the front walk, moving fast. The woman with the portfolio walking beside him, her heels on the brick path. Garrett. His son stopped, but didn't turn. When you're ready to be my son again, Howard said. The doors open. Garrett stood there for another moment. Then he got in his car. They drove away without looking back. Howard stood on the porch. Cal was kneeling by the railing with his sanding block forgotten in his hand. He looked at Howard. You all right? Howard looked at the street where the car had been. Yeah, he said. I'm all right. Was that really your son? Howard looked at the spot where the car had turned the corner. That was my son. Cal didn't say anything else. He went back to sanding, and from the 3rd floor through the windows, Dorothy had opened that morning, for the first time, the faint sound of music. Not Dorothy. She had come to stand beside Howard on the porch, just the wind moving through the room, moving across the open pages of Alice's compositions on the music stand, the soft rustling of paper on a still afternoon, like something breathing, like something that had been waiting a very long time and was not done waiting yet. The evening after Garrett left, Dorothy played for 2 hours, not practicing, not working through fingering, just playing. She played every composition of Alice's she knew by heart, and several she had to read from the page. She played with the windows open for the first time since they had found the room, the 3rd floor windows, the ones that looked out over Prosper Street. She did not think about Garrett while she played. She thought about Mabel Ames sitting in this house alone for years. She thought about a woman who had lost her daughter on a Friday and gotten up on Monday and kept living because that was what was required. She thought about what it meant to seal a door and leave a key above the frame, to say, I can't go in, but I can't lock it away forever either. There was a kind of courage in that, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that anyone would write a newspaper article about, the quiet kind, which was the hardest kind. Howard sat on the front steps. Finn sat beside him. Down the block, a screen door, a porch light coming on, and 4 houses down, a small figure on a front step with an oxygen cart sitting in the dark, listening. Ida. She was there every night now. She had been there since the first night the music came through those windows. She was there when the phone rang the next morning. Dorothy was in the kitchen. She looked at the screen. The number was new, but the area code was not. She answered. Mom. She knew the voice before the word was finished. Her middle child, Roland, who had changed his number and sent a text about senior communities and had not spoken to them in 6 months. She leaned against the counter. I know who it is, she said. A long pause. Mom, I'm sorry. She waited. I know that's not enough. I know saying it doesn't go back in time and fix what happened, but I'm sorry. I should have called months ago, the day after Garrett told me what he did. I should have driven over. I should have said he was wrong. Why didn't you? Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that meant someone was being honest with themselves before they were honest with anyone else. Because it was easier, Roland said. Not to. Garrett handles things. He always has. I let him handle it, and by the time I understood what handling had actually meant, It felt too late to say anything without it costing me something. It cost your mother something, she said. I know. She looked out the kitchen window. Howard was in the side yard, stacking old lumber in a neat pile for the neighbor who used it for kindling. Methodical, unhurried, the way he did everything. Can I come see the house? Roland said. I don't need to stay. I just want to see what you've built. I want to hear you play. She watched Howard through the window. He picked up a board, turned it over, decided it was worth keeping. It's always been your house too, she said. Come on Saturday. Bring nothing, just yourself. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she dried the last dish from breakfast, put it away, and went upstairs to play. The students came first in ones, then twos. A woman knocked on the door one Thursday afternoon with a girl behind her. The girl was 11 with the stillness of a child who has been told no enough times to have stopped expecting yes. Her right hand, third and fourth fingers, an accident on the family's farm. 2 teachers had turned her away in the same month. I heard about the music you found, the woman said. I heard about what it was for. Dorothy looked at the girl. The girl looked back at her. The girl's name was Sarah. Come in, Dorothy said. She started Sarah that same afternoon on the simplest of Alice's beginning pieces. Within 20 minutes, Sarah was playing a simple melody, her damaged fingers finding the positions that Alice had designed 66 years before she was born, the notes coming out clean and full and right. Sarah smiled, not politely, really, the way children smiled when they had just been told by something undeniable that the people who said they couldn't were wrong. Dorothy had not seen that smile in 4 years, not since before the arthritis ended her teaching, and it landed somewhere behind her sternum and stayed there. 3 more students came the following week, then 3 more. Nora organized things without being asked. She kept the schedule. She ordered supplies. She arranged the donated upright piano that the church had been keeping in a storage room. Dorothy kept Alice's Steinway for her own playing and for advanced work. The upright went in the parlor, which had become the teaching studio. The 3rd floor room stayed exactly as they had found it, except cleaner and warmer and open. It was a Tuesday when Ida Pruitt knocked on the front door. She was moving slowly with the oxygen cart, her dark eyes sharp, her white hair caught back neatly. Dorothy held the door. Ida said, I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no, and I will not be in the least offended. Dorothy waited. I would like to learn to play. Dorothy looked at her. Ida looked back at her with those eyes that had been paying close attention for 78 years. I know I'm old, Ida said. I know I have. She gestured at the oxygen cart. I know what my hands look like. She held up her hands. They were thin, spotted, the fingers slightly curved from decades of work and age. Alice never got to teach me, Ida said. She said it simply, the way you said facts that had been true for a very long time. I was too young then, and she was gone too soon, and I have been sitting 4 houses down from this piano for 65 years. She paused. I think I've waited long enough. Dorothy opened the door wider. Come in, she said. She started Ida on the very first exercise in Alice's collection, the simplest one, a single-line melody that moved only in steps and skips, notes that did not require a span, notes that a hand with limited strength could press cleanly, notes that made something beautiful and true with the minimum of mechanical demand. Ida played it slowly, very slowly, and every note was right. She looked at her hands when she finished. This woman who had known Alice as a child, who had sat on her back steps on summer evenings to listen, who had watched a 19-year-old girl come home from the hospital with her hand bandaged and go straight to this piano. She wrote this for us, Ida said. Dorothy sat beside her on the bench. She did, she said. That's exactly what she did. Cal passed his GED on the 2nd attempt in November, not because the first attempt had been close, because the first attempt had happened at all. He came to the house that morning looking like a person who had just realized something about themselves that they couldn't unlearn. Howard had coffee ready. They sat at the kitchen table. "I want to apply to the state university," Cal said. "Engineering program." Howard said nothing. "I know that's." Cal stopped. "I know I'm behind. I know I don't have a diploma. I don't have money. My grandmother can't afford the application fees. I don't even know where to." Howard slid a folder across the table. Cal opened it. Application materials. The structural engineering program at the state university. A page of notes in Howard's careful handwriting. The deadline. The application requirements. A list of scholarships available to students from this county. "You already looked into it," Cal said. "The second week you were here," Howard said. "You see how things fit together." "That's not something I taught you. That's something you have." Cal looked at the folder, then at Howard, then at the folder again. "I can't afford it. They have scholarships for students from this county. I'll write the recommendation letter." Cal put his cap on, took it off, put it back on. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me. Apply." The recommendation letter took Howard 2 evenings. He used the old typewriter from the cellar that had belonged to someone in this house a long time ago. It still worked. The keystrokes left slightly uneven impressions on the page. He didn't ask for help writing it. She heard it from the parlor, the rhythmic knock of keys, the ding of the carriage return at the end of each line, the sound of a man choosing his words. She smiled at her music. There was a retired farmer who came on Wednesday afternoons. His name was Ben Howell, and he was 67, and his hands had spent 40 years doing work that hands were not designed to do gracefully. He sat down at the upright piano with the expression of a man who had been convinced against his better judgment. "She played the same piece for me twice," he told Nora afterward. "Then she asked me to try it. I said I couldn't. She said try it anyway. He tried it. The notes came out. Not perfectly, not quickly, but they came out. She wrote for us," he told Nora. "This girl who died before I was born. She wrote for exactly these hands." "I know," Nora said. There was also a retired school secretary named Patricia who had been told by her doctor to maintain fine motor activity. She came on Fridays. She had arthritis in both hands and no piano master experience, and a stubbornness that Dorothy recognized as belonging to a woman who had spent decades managing things no one thought to appreciate. She was playing Alice's second composition by the end of her third lesson. Dr. Whitfield came back in January. She brought a colleague this time, a musicologist from the conservatory named Dr. Farrow, who wore a bow tie and handled Alice's pages with the careful precision of a man used to irreplaceable things. He spent 4 hours in the room. He came downstairs and sat across from Dorothy and Howard at the kitchen table. He looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked up. "I've been working in this field for 30 years, he said. "We have a category of compositions we call adaptive works, music written specifically for musicians with physical limitations. And in 30 years, I have never seen work of this scope produced before 1970. He placed his hands flat on the table. "What Alice Ames composed in this house predates the entire formal literature by almost 2 decades. This isn't just historically significant in the academic sense. These are beautiful pieces, musically beautiful. The adaptive elements are invisible to the listener. You hear the music first. What it does for the player is engineering, but what it sounds like is art." He paused. "With your permission, the university would like to publish the complete collection, a scholarly edition with critical notes and teaching annotations. We would like to name Alice Ames as the originating theorist of the adaptive piano method." Dorothy looked at Mabel's letter in its archival sleeve. She thought about Mabel sitting here in February of 1959, writing 2 pages, leaving them in an envelope, trusting in something she could not name. "Please let the music live." "Yes," Dorothy said, "all of it." The spring recital was held on the first Saturday in May. Nora organized it, which meant it happened. The parlor was arranged with borrowed chairs from the church and the Methodist hall and Ida's living room, flowers from the garden beds that a group from the church had planted along the front walk, a framed copy of the 1954 newspaper photograph on the side table, Alice at the concert, grand chin lifted, composed smile, 40 seats, everyone filled, people standing in the hallway, people on the stairs, a man from the garden club who had donated 2 dogwood trees for the side yard, standing in the kitchen doorway with a cup of coffee and his hat in his hand, Ida Pruitt in the front row, oxygen cart beside her, Cal on her left, Nora on her right. Cal was sitting very straight for a boy who usually sat like someone who expected the chair to betray him. Dorothy's students played in order. The boy who had started in September went first, 9 years old, a simple piece from Alice's opening exercises. He played it slowly and carefully with both hands, and every note landed true. He looked up when he finished, and his face was the face of someone who had done a thing they were not certain they could do, and had now discovered the floor was solid. Ben Howell played next. The retired farmer with the thick hands, he played Alice's third composition, which required real coordination between the hands in ways that had taken him 3 months to find. He played it steadily. He played it without stopping. When he finished, he looked at his hands on the keys for a moment. Then he looked out at the room. She knew these hands, he said. That's all. She just knew them. Nobody argued with that. Patricia, the school secretary, played with her eyes on the page and her chin set in the determined way she had, and she hit every note, and when she lifted her hands at the end, she made a sound like the exhale of someone who had held something heavy for a long time and could now put it down. And then it was Sarah's turn, the girl with the injured hand, 11 years old, 7 months of lessons, Alice's composition called 4 Hands That Remember. The same piece Dorothy had sight-read on the morning they opened the room, the same piece she had returned to 100 times since. Sarah had been working on it for 2 months. She sat at the Steinway. She adjusted her bench. She placed her hands on the keys. And she played, not tentatively, not haltingly. She played it the way you played something, when you had worked on it long enough that you stopped thinking about the notes and started hearing the music. Her damaged fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of fingers that had found out what they could do and had decided to do it. The room was completely silent, that kind of quiet that meant something real was happening. When Sarah finished, the silence held for 1 full second. Then Nora started clapping, and the room followed. Dorothy was standing at the back of the room. She watched the girl accept the applause with the careful poise of a child, not showing how much it means. She watched Ben Howell wipe his eyes with the back of his hand and look at the ceiling as if the ceiling had nothing to do with any of it. She watched Ida Pruitt in the front row, both hands pressed flat against her knees, her face doing something complicated and bright. Dorothy played last. She sat at Alice's piano. The room had gone quiet again. She placed the composition on the stand. Letter to Someone I Haven't Met, Alice's most complex piece, the last one she had written, the one with the deepest musical architecture and the most sophisticated adapted fingerings, the one that required the full measure of what Dorothy had built back over these months. She had memorized it. She did not look at the page. She looked at her hands, her swollen knuckles, the ring finger that barely bent, the left hand better than the right, but still not what it had been at 40 or 50 or even 60. 48 years ago, she had sat at a piano with hands that could do anything she asked of them, and she had not really known what that was worth. You didn't know what you had until the day you picked it up and it weighed nothing, until the day you reached for it and your fingers fell short. She closed her eyes. She played. The melody rose from the old Steinway, Alice's melody, warm and searching and moving forward with the momentum of music that knew where it was going before you did. Dorothy's hands found every note, found them with the confidence of months of practice and the quiet miracle of fingerings designed for exactly what her hands were, not what they had been, what they were now. She played the first page, the second. The room behind her was entirely still. She played the final phrase. Let the held note die. Let the silence come in. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. For a moment, nothing. Then the sound from outside, because the third-floor windows were open, because the spring evening was warm enough for open windows for the first time, because the music had gone out through those windows and down to Prosper Street below, and people had stopped. She could hear them through the window, not voices, not words, just the silence of people who are standing outside in the evening and not moving, the silence of people listening. She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought of Alice at 19, composing at this desk on a Monday, gone by Friday. She thought of Mabel in February of 1959, sitting at the same desk, writing 2 pages for someone she would never meet. She thought of Ida at 13, sitting on the back steps on a summer evening, listening. She thought of a girl named Sarah, who had been told she would never play piano. She thought of her mother's wedding ring. The envelope came in the mail 2 weeks later. She was walking back from the mailbox when she saw the handwriting. Her son's. She knew it before she consciously processed it. 48 years of birthday cards and report cards and permission slips had made his handwriting as familiar as his voice. She stood at the end of the front walk for a moment. Then she went inside. She opened it at the kitchen table. A single folded piece of paper. No, not a piece of paper. She unfolded it. Inside, a ring, gold band, slightly worn on the outer curve, engraved on the inside. She could not read the engraving from this angle, but she did not need to. She knew what it said. 2 sets of initials, a date, 1951, the year her parents had married in a small church in a town she had not lived in for 50 years. The ring had been cleaned, polished. It was brighter than she had seen it in years. No note, no letter, no explanation, just the ring. She held it in both hands. She sat at the kitchen table and held it and did not move for a long time. She was not thinking about Garrett. She was not calculating what this meant or what would come next, or whether the gesture was enough or too little or too late. She was not doing any of the things she might have expected herself to do. She was thinking about her mother, who had worn this ring the day she married, the day Dorothy was born, the day Dorothy's father came home from the hospital and never went back, every ordinary day after that, every extraordinary one, all the way to the end. She was thinking about the way it had felt under her palm in those last minutes, the weight of it, the warmth of it from her mother's hand. She was thinking about Mabel Ames, who had sealed a door because she could not go in, but had left the key above the frame because she could not lock it away forever, because some things were not meant to be locked away forever. She put the ring on her finger, her ring finger right hand, where her mother had worn it. It fit. It had always fit. She had not known that. She had kept it in the box and not worn it because it felt like something that should be preserved, kept safe, not used. But things kept safe in cedar boxes were not always served well by the keeping. She poured 2 cups of coffee. Howard came in from the side yard where he had been replacing the last of the rotted lattice along the foundation. He washed his hands at the new kitchen sink. He dried them on the towel by the counter. He picked up his coffee cup. He saw her hand. He did not say anything. He looked at the ring for one long moment. Then he looked at her face. Then he drank his coffee. She drank hers. They stood at the kitchen counter in the quiet of 48 years. The kind of quiet that did not need to be filled. The kind of quiet that was its own answer. Roland came on Saturday. He came alone. No luggage, no portfolio, no one with a clipboard. Just himself, 50 years old and looking slightly tentative in the way of a man who knew he was on probationary footing and was not going to pretend otherwise. Dorothy opened the door. They looked at each other. He said, "Mom." She said, "Come in." She did not embrace him immediately, not because she was withholding it, because she needed a moment. She needed him to walk into the house first, to see it, to understand what they had built and what it meant. He walked through the foyer, the parlor with the upright piano and the sheet music arranged on the stand, the dining room with its stone fireplace cleaned and the mantel bare except for the framed newspaper photograph, the kitchen with its new stove and working sink and the smell of coffee. He walked up the stairs. He walked the second floor. He walked to the third floor. She followed him. He stood in the doorway of Alice's room for a long time. He looked at the Steinway, at the stacks of archival sleeves along the walls, at the writing desk, at the framed copy of Mabel's letter above it. He looked at everything with the attention of a man who was trying to understand the full weight of what he had not been present for. Then he turned. His eyes were wet. She let them be wet. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. She looked at him. She looked at her mother's ring on her right hand. "Come, hear me play," she said. "That's enough for now." That evening, the house was loud with people. Nora brought dinner from the diner. Cal came with his grandmother, Ida, who managed the front steps with her oxygen cart and Cal's arm and a determination that was something to see. Ben Howell from the farm, Patricia with her careful hands, the electrician who had rewired the house, the plumber from the church. Roland ate at the long kitchen table and talked to Cal about engineering and listened to Ida tell stories about Alice and sat next to Howard in the comfortable way of a son who is remembering who his father was before the complication of money made everyone smaller. After dinner, Dorothy went upstairs. She opened the windows. She sat at Alice's piano. She played, not for the room this time, for the street. The evening was warm, and the light was the long gold of early May, and the elm trees on Prosper Street had come fully into leaf for the first time since she had lived here. She played Alice's music, and it went through the open windows and down to the street below. Howard came out onto the porch. He sat on the top step. Finn sat beside him. The dog's white blaze caught the last of the sunlight. His right ear up, his left ear folded, the faded red collar around his neck, his amber eyes on the street. Down the block, a screen door opened. A woman came out onto her porch and stood listening. Then a man across the street. Then a couple who had been walking a dog. They stopped on the sidewalk. The dog sat. One by one, people came out of their houses or paused on the street and stood in the warm evening and listened to music coming from the third-floor windows of the house that everyone in Caulfield had called haunted for 60 years. They didn't clap. They didn't call out. They just stood there in the last of the daylight, listening. A boy of about 12 came running down the sidewalk and stopped at the edge of the front walk. He looked up at the Victorian, the fresh paint, the solid porch, the tower on the southeast corner that had a clean window now and not a bird's nest. He looked at Howard on the step. "My mom says this used to be the haunted house." Howard looked up at the third-floor windows. Through them faint in the evening air Alice's music, rising and falling, moving forward with its own quiet logic. The melody that a 19-year-old girl had written in a sealed room for someone she had never met, for hands she had never held, for a woman who would not be born for another 13 years. Finn's tail swept the step once. "It wasn't haunted," Howard said. "It was just waiting." The boy looked at him, shrugged, and ran off down the sidewalk to find his mother. Howard sat on the porch in the last of the May evening, the music still coming through the windows above, the people still on the street below, the elm trees in full leaf, the house at his back solid and warm and full of light. He reached down and put his hand on Finn's back. The dog leaned into him, just slightly, not requesting anything, just there, the way all the best things were.